Hi, everyone. We are the members of Nickel and Dime, which is the official publishing and research platform for Center for New Economic Studies. In today's episode, this is going to be a collaboration between the Legal Studies cluster and the International Relations cluster. And we're going to be discussing something that has been very much in news in the recent weeks. We're going to be discussing the abortion ban in the US, how the overturning of Roe versus Wade ruling, and how that affects not just American women, but also women across the world. So to kick off, just for someone, like just for our viewers and our listeners to get an understanding of what really is happening around, can someone just begin with what exactly was the Roe versus Wade ruling, and why was it overturned after so long, and like what were the arguments that were presented by both the sides? Sure, yes, Shashank.
So basically what happened was that on the 24th of June 2022, the Supreme Court overturned the Roe v. Wade case. It was a landmark judgment in their jurisprudential history, which kind of gave women constitutional right to abortion and legalized it nationwide. That was standing for around 50 years. But now what happened was that there was a US local court, Mississippi court, and that had actually banned abortion to a certain petitioner after 15 weeks. And the petitioner had gone to the Supreme Court and citing the Roe v. Wade case and said that, it is legal, and why is it kind of abolished now? And to everyone's surprise, the US Supreme Court actually withheld the decision of the Mississippi court, thereby overturning the decision. So right now it has scrapped the Roe v. Wade case and calling it it was an erroneous judgment of the past. And right now, it's not completely illegal in the United States to get an abortion, but it has just removed that constitutional backing, and states are now free to choose whether they want to impose abortions or not. The arguments given by both the sides were, those who opposed abortion, they call themselves pro-life, and it was kind of the main opposition was somewhat from the Catholic Church and the religious groupings, and they felt that it was immoral to kind of kill a life even before it was born, and it was against the teachings in the Bible. Whereas on the other hand, the pro-choice who were supported abortions, they felt that human reproductive rights, including the rights to abortion, was a fundamental human rights, and it encompassed a lot of other rights, like say right to liberty, privacy, information, right to life, and things like that. And hence they felt that the US backtracking on its historical judgment was somewhat a regressive move.
Yes, and thank you for such a comprehensive overview of what's happening. Like you rightly mentioned that even though abortion is not like banned, but again, like states are now free to choose the path that they wish to take, and that can actually have a major impact on American women. And that brings me to my next question: how does this affect American women? Like you mentioned, most of their rights, right to privacy, right to choose what they want to do with their body, and their health, all of that's being affected. And do you all think that some women from some particular subgroups are will be different, will be more impacted, or maybe more vulnerable to such threats? Yeah, Ishta and then Nanadi.
Yeah, surely women's lives will be affected. Childbearing is not necessarily an easy job. And so I was reading this article on how it will have a lot of impacts on women at work. Like, obviously their labor force participation would go down because they have to bear like a whole child, and like abortion access was a major thing which contributed to women's labor force participation earlier. And now that abortion bans have been with the coming of this with the coming of this Roe versus Wade, like the passing of this act, nearly 60% women, it's like it's assumed that nearly 60% women's participation in the labor force could go down, which would not only affect the economy of USA in general, but also it would lead to a huge economic gap between both the genders. And this will also lead to lower educational attainment, because a lot of women who get pregnant and when they are in college or in school, because they cannot abort their child anymore, they will, I mean, this will become a hindrance in attaining their education, which again would affect their um, employment opportunities a lot. Similarly, the types of jobs that these women will get will be much more restricted, and all of this as a whole would affect their incomes a lot. And because their incomes are being affected because they cannot abort, this will become even more difficult for them to take care of a child. Moreover, this also affects women in different like races and classes. Um, so there's the statistics which says that in 2014, 49% of all the abortions were obtained by people who are below the poverty line. And as of 2004, approximately a third were obtained by people who were white, and 37% by those who were black, and 22% by Hispanic people. Now, black women are significantly more likely than white people, like white women, to experience unintended pregnancy because of the disparities between their economic conditions and the education that is attained as comparison to the education that is attained by a white woman as in comparison to a black woman. So this would affect black women and Hispanic women, women of color more than white women.
Yeah, Nandini, you can go.
So I would actually like to add on to Ishita's points. So not in from what I understand, this not only affects people who are emotionally or financially incapable of giving birth, but also people who are physically incapable of giving birth, because there are people who have undergone certain complications because of which the fetus dies or something else happens, and this in turn would affect her health. And in places where the termination of a fetus is not allowed, it would actually end up in the death of the mother as well. This is not only a pro-life argument to ban abortions, but it's also something that actually kills more than saves lives. So that's one point that I wanted to add.
Oh, that's
Shreya,
a really good
Yeah,
point.
additionally, abortion isn't some new thing. It's been part of the human milieu for as long as pregnancy has been around. Let's be honest about it. As long as our thoughts of modernity, as long as our thoughts of not modernity per se, but more like protection of women and their honor and whatever around that, and the idea of, again, the myth around women's virginities and all of that stuff. To protect this idea of purity, abortions have been around for a while. And the fact of the matter is, people have been going for very risky avenues of abortion by disallowing women from going for safe avenues of the same medical treatment. I feel like you would just put a lot of communities at risk, a lot of people at risk, because they'll still have sex, they'll still get pregnant, they'll still want to have those abortions to protect their livelihoods, they'll still try to protect themselves. So and according to data, even in countries where abortion is outlawed, the difference isn't great. Like, places that ban abortions and places that don't ban abortion, the difference between recorded abortions is humongous. But it's not as if where it's banned, abortions aren't happening. And as Nandini said, it's abortion is at times the best course of treatment as well, best course of medical treatment as well, for the mother, even for the child. Certain diseases, certain disorders and diseases, such as, going to Grey's Anatomy here, but the one that comes to my head is osteogenesis imperfecta. um fetuses can pass away within the womb, and women would still be forced to carry out their term pregnancy, which is just, I mean, what life are we prioritizing here?
No, exactly. And the fact that, how Ishita just pointed out, different subgroups of women would be differently affected. And again, abortions are still going to be happening. You can't put a stop on abortions. It's just the accessibility that's going to be affected. And again, the women who are already the most disadvantaged are, they stand to lose the most in this race. Anyway, oh yeah, Malika, please.
Yeah, and one of the most important things is that where in America, where even especially where education, as higher education is such an expensive course, and since most people are sexually active in that duration of time when they are in university and everything, when if a woman over there, a student gets pregnant, and then she has to make that choice between fulfilling her education or having a child, and it's not even a choice anymore. That choice is taken away from her. She has to have that child. And if she makes a choice to go to another state, because a lot of states now have put in the rule that if a woman from this state comes to another state where abortions are legal, to come and get an abortion, that is not allowed either. That is illegal. And she might not have the resources to spend extra money, even though she's already in debt because of her tuition fees. She doesn't have the money to go to another state that will allow her to get an abortion. So all of these things, and it's not going to be covered in health insurance and everything. So how will she get access to these things? How much that will become that is going to change her life forever in a way that if she won't be able to, even her future is going to be completely gone off the rails. And that is something that I think people are not realizing. It's going to affect women in the workforce a lot. It's going to affect the future of women in the workforce, the future of where women will stand in, like in academics and everything, because all of these things are going to be taken away from them, and it's not going to be easy for them to even continue the path that they had chosen for themselves. It might increase resentment in them. It might increase mental health issues like we talked about. So all of these things will impact them severely.
Yeah, Parth.
Yeah, Malaika's point is interesting, and I think we all have also observed that post the overruling of Roe versus Wade, there was a lot of pushback from private organizations who were funding transport to other states and abortions for their female employees. So you can see that the United States is in a sort of turmoil right now, where even though the state machinery, the lawmakers, the capital, as well as the Supreme Court is pushing against sort of, it's arguable to say, but like liberties, but there is the private sector which is pushing back, and they also have certain credibility. They have political leverage, economic leverage. So there is that tension that is being explored in the states right now, and I think that is. I mean, we'll come to this later, but that is also something that we can foresee for the developing countries in the near future as well, which still have more restrictive practices against personal liberties.
That's a really interesting point, and like brings us perfectly to our next question. So like the Supreme Court, when it like its rulings, like the Brown versus Beard, that deemed that school segregation is illegal, it was actually used to cite in different courts in other countries abroad. So even though it's like a very positive aspect, but when it comes to a ruling like this, where something, again, as you mentioned, the liberties are being pushed back, uh, do you think this ruling stands to affect women that are not American, or countries abroad, say the developing countries or any countries of that sort? Yeah, Rushil and then Malik.
Yeah, when we talk about America, I think America's biggest export is its culture. America has amazing soft power, perhaps the greatest soft power country in the history of countries ever. And I think if we look back in history, whenever America has set the tone, the world has sort of followed its lead, especially the Western world. We see any of the decisions that have been taken, I guess you could say since World War II, the decisions that America has taken, it has largely been supplanted in the Western world itself, as countries such as UK, France, and Germany, the liberalized world order that sort of follows the tone that America has set. But this is kind of an interesting tipping point, because what we have seen in the past few years is a very rightward ideological shift in all these liberalized democracies. You look at UK with the advent of Boris Johnson. You look at France, Marine Le Pen almost defeated Macron in a very close election in France. You look at Germany, the rise of the right-wing parties and how they're garnering right-wing support. And of course, in the US with the advent of Trump and, the rise of republicanism. So it's a very interesting point, because we have sort of looked at America as the vanguard in these sort of issues, in the issues of issues relating to democracy, in issues relating to civil rights and private rights, and right to freedom and whatnot. However, I sort of think, like, on a geopolitical basis, since we have seen, we have seen a real downfall of America, I think, and with the rise of China, I think culturally also countries are now start going to compete consciously. And I think if you look at countries such as India and countries in Southeast Asia and whatnot, who have always looked to America to sort of create its own model of democracy, or sort of imbibe some values of democracy, it's going to be very interesting to see if countries such as India or new developing nations would sort of imbibe this sort of value order that has been set by the overturning of Roe v. Wade precedent. So yeah, I would say that America's soft power is really going to be questioned now.
Yeah, Malik.
I think Rochelle summed it up perfectly by saying that America's greatest export is its culture. Three things basically how this will impact like women in other countries. Firstly, it's the funding. So the difference between like women's sexual rights movements in Europe, in Africa and South America, they have a different history. So in South America, in Catholic countries, they are more rooted, more organic. They mostly did what they did without the help from US organizations. But in Africa, it's a different story. Most of the help for these organizations, most of the training for the personnel who are deployed for sexual health of women, they are trained in USA, but they are trained by US instructors. And the funding mostly comes from USA. And even before the overturning of this historical rule, of this historical judgment, things were already bad. There a lot of restrictions were placed on what activities would be funded, what would not be funded. So it was pretty conservative to begin with. Now it has gotten significantly worse. So like movements in South America, they might not suffer as much because they didn't have much of a connection to begin with. But movements where America was directly involved, American non-governmental organizations were directly involved, they will take a hit. They will take a drastic hit because of it. Secondly, so this comes for funding and training. Funding was already bad, now it will get worse. Same goes for the training. Now comes for the legal precedents. South Korea, Ireland, these countries, a lot of legal precedents were taken from Roe versus Wade, and similar as are taken in like gun rights and all of that. So that will take a hit because this will be used by establishments in most countries are already very conservative and they just need an excuse. So this will be a pretty good legal excuse for them. This will be used because it won't be cited as a human right anymore. That's what most organizations are concerned about, that it's not a human right anymore. It's not a fundamental concern. So let's restrict it. That's the concern in Bangladesh, Indonesia, and most of the African countries. So, but these were the most vocal ones. So the American soft power was there. It wasn't perfect, as already said, but it was something, and it's going to hit those areas where the help was direct. It might not hit those areas where help wasn't as direct because those movements were more organic. But yeah, it will set a bad legal precedent for conservative establishments worldwide, and thus a serious downfall for the rights of women.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, as Malik pointed out, it's important to consider how sexual and reproductive health was already being framed by America beforehand this judgment itself, because there has been evidence of, even it's not just in terms of providing abortions in countries where they have been providing medical care. It's also been about providing oral contraceptives and oral methodologies for abortion, which are comparatively safer and basically after morning pills and everything else, which is not provided by these organizations that carry out medical stuff in these countries. Additional to that, I feel a lot of highlight was given to the Indian controversy around abortion currently that's going on in the Supreme Court and the High Court, in the Delhi High Court. And I feel like, again, Roe v. Wade is raising issues around abortion, and I feel like a lot of us are celebrating the fact that Supreme Court did allow the woman to go for the abortion at 24 weeks pending the AIMS report. But it's important to consider that why the Delhi High Court even refused it, how they are tracing decisions around pregnancy and the idea of the fetus, not to the mother or the but rather to the fact that she's unmarried, and that's why she doesn't deserve the freedoms provided by the 24-week amendment. So it's just, I feel like we already started to being affected by it, and even though the Supreme Court was very savvy in saying that this is not the US, um I don't think there's anything to celebrate. Right? I mean, there's not really anything to celebrate, considering, yes, great that we have protections for abortion, but it's not that great, guys. I mean, calm down.
Thank you, Shreya. Parth, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, just couple of things. First, regarding Shreya's point, so if you look at other streams of new laws like technology law, competition law, securities law, there is a trend in, if you look at India specifically, of taking inspiration from the developed countries. The primary landmark judgments on competition law, for example, cite US decisions as precedent or as a basis that, okay, they said this, we rely on this, this is the correct understanding. That would be essentially important, coming back to Malik's point about how it will be used as a precedent. So, for example, tomorrow if there's a PIL filed, either in the Delhi High Court or in the Supreme Court or any other High Court for that matter, saying that citing Roe versus Wade. And the idea is, it's very interesting because if you listen to the pro-lifers, it's a fantastic argument they're making, because the way they skew the scales, they put the right to abortion diametrically opposite to right to life. And right to life is essentially explicitly guarded by the Indian Constitution as well. So I think it would be very interesting how the High Court or the Supreme Court reacts to such a PIL if it is filed. That is, I think, that will be quite one of the primary repercussions of this in all countries for that matter. Secondly, what Malik said about funding was bang on. I definitely agree with that. I think apart from direct funding to by so US non-governmental and governmental organizations accounted for 23% of global funding in 2019. That is a mammoth size. And apart from directly giving funds to pro-abortion or anti-abortion organizations, the aid packages that they give, they link their aid to human rights development within nations. That is how they've led the world order for the past few decades or so forth. So aid packages to Pakistan, they're linked to right to protest, right to fair elections, all of that. Whether they work or not is a separate thing, but at least they're part of the negotiations. That will, I think, also take a hit, because now the right to abortion or the right to women health would be compromised in those negotiations for aid. That is, I think, relevant. And third thing that I wanted to point out was the point that was being made by Rushal about soft power and American culture. I mean, if I take examples in India, the idea of a working woman is not very old. The working professional who stays away from the house and is independent. From my personal experience, it was introduced to me through American literature and American films. That is their soft power. That is their culture, showing the independent woman. So they also lead. They have a lot of influence over a global audience on how to lead a life. And I think that will also take a hit once Hollywood is still arguably more liberal as compared to the ongoing conservative wave in the States. But I think over time, if that shifts, if conservative narratives find more space and are presented to a global audience, I think that will lead to a shift in a sort of global thinking of leaning towards conservatism. I think that is something we should look out for. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Malika, what would you like to say?
Yeah, just continuing what Malik and what Parth said about the funding aspect. Even before Roe v. Wade was overturned, we saw like where the American army or where America was providing medical aid to whichever countries they were providing medical aid to, they had already put in a statement where they would not, it was in their regulations that they would not provide aid for women who wanted to get abortions. So in these countries where they were providing aid, in like Iraq or Afghanistan, wherever, they were not allowing women who had been raped, who were like affected by this sexual harassment or anything. They were not allowed to get aid from American authorities. Where for in areas where only medical aid was available, they had no other aid, medical aid provided at all. So that the repercussions, we saw that before Roe v. Wade was overturned, and now that conservatism is going to follow in these countries. Like Malik said, like we are going to see that change in countries and like where conservative powers have already started like rising. We have seen it in South Korea with the new president. We have seen it in Brazil for so many years now. We saw the way the president reacted to COVID-19 and his conservative mindset towards things. So in all these countries, and these are powerful countries, Brazil is like what, the fourth most populated country in the world. If they start putting in these like systems of banning abortion and everything, that is going to affect so many women and so many people in direct consequence.
Thank you. So this actually leads to the next question, which is about how how this decision which was taken by America goes against the against the human rights which have been upheld by the international order. So even though we have discussed this to a certain extent, we can go into the depth of it and we can question whether the American image is going to be affected in the international position, and if so, how. So if anybody would like to take up this. Shreya.
Hi, sorry, I wasn't unmuting for some reason. But yeah, on the grounds of the American image, I feel when it comes to the present central government that they have with Biden and everything, with how they're openly opposing the judgment and how they are, at least on the face of it, pretending to talk about a legislation that would cover all states. I feel at the moment, I don't think it will be unless the next government is Republican, like Trump Republican kinds of Republican, not just like a soft Republican. I feel like then it would be impacted. And I again, the whole Roe v. Wade thing, I feel like it's more of a judgment in like it's after other countries have done it as well. Like Poland banned abortion before them. Northern Ireland still has follows a very restrictive regime. Banning abortion or curbing rights on abortion is not new to the Western world either. It's been happening, and I feel like the US is just another notch in the belt for this kind of politics. I believe herein demarcation between the state and the central might, I mean, you'll still have the blue states like California and New York who will of course not be banning abortion. It's just a matter of whether or not central governments now will lead the charge to provide legislative freedom for women for abortion. If that were to happen, I don't think America's image would be impacted. And even if it, I feel like America's image around this idea of even with regards to feminist movements, how we even when we talk about gender studies, how colonial we are about talking about the three waves of feminism and how they were always carried out by America. So I feel like they've centralized themselves too much to the women's movement as a culture. They aren't that central, but they have ensured that they are considered to be central in terms of culture. So I don't think they'll be impacted that much. I don't know why. I feel like the world will forget it. I don't know why.
Malika.
So coming back to what Rushla said about the soft thing that America has so much of America doesn't realize how much responsibility it has upon the world because of how much its culture affects the world. Almost all of the media that we consume, English speakers consume, is American. And one thing that I have noticed, like since the COVID-19, even before that, but since COVID-19, and we saw the reception of America towards like dealing with the pandemic, something on Twitter that I remember reading was that America is just a third world country with like a Gucci belt on. It's like, it's just glamorous on the face of it. Underneath it is just, it is a third world country. And I think a lot of people have woken up to this issue. And like, even on TikTok and everything, you'll see these trends of like Americans like saying, what have you realized about your country after moving outside of America? How has America like messed you up and stuff? And like, people are recognizing, young Americans are recognizing about why is America, what is wrong with it. They're understanding why healthcare is important, why they require universal healthcare. And it's something that a lot of criticism, at least on Twitter, has been centered around, that life in America might seem like all glamorous and everything, but there's a lot that is wrong with it. So at least I think maybe the newer generation that is online and is being a part of these discussions and seeing these discussions like take place also is at least being informed, even if they don't agree or have an opinion about it, at least they're being informed about that there is an alternative to what is being provided in your country. And it might just be better for you. So yeah.
Thank you. Parth?
Yeah, I think I disagree with Shreya's point a bit about how America's reputation is not affected or won't be affected. Over time, I've seen a shift in a sort of decrease in America's respect on the human rights, sort of in the international human rights order.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm
If
sorry to,
I take an
but Parth?
example of
Parth, we
Yeah.
can't hear you at all. Like it's
how
Yeah, your voice is breaking. You're not very audible, right?
lack, people questioning American idealism. So this was something that was quite Jaishankar. I think that was the. Sorry, can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes, it's better now.
I don't know. Is it audible now?
Yes.
You guys can go ahead. Oh, okay. I just wanted to point out that our foreign minister, Mr. S. Jaishankar, I think he was the first of any Indian ministers who, on a global platform, said we are concerned with human rights issues in America. That was a huge stance, and it wasn't an average level bureaucrat or diplomat. It was our national foreign minister. I think that statement in itself shows a sort of shift in America leading the international world order, being the pinnacle of human rights. Yeah.
All right, thank you for that point. That's actually a very valid one. So this leads to the last question, since you brought up the Indian foreign minister, that what are the current abortion laws in India, and if they are affected by the US, by this judgment in the US, and if they are, how will they be affected? If there's anybody who would like to comment on that. Yes, Amya.
So to go into the technicalities of it so that everybody knows their rights, Section 312 of the Indian Penal Code criminalizes intentional causing of miscarriages. So if the miscarriage isn't in good faith or the purpose of saving the life of a woman, it's criminalized. And then in 1971, a law came about called the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act, which allowed registered medical practitioners to carry about abortion, but under certain specified circumstances. So some of these circumstances are pregnancy caused by rape can be terminated, or even incest in the case of minors. Even if a woman, there's a change of marital status during the ongoing pregnancy, she can opt for abortion, whether it being her being widowed or divorce. Women with physical disabilities. However, recently, ever since the Roe versus Wade judgment took place, a lot of people have noticed that unmarried women are not actually accounted for in the act. And it doesn't specify that if unmarried women are choosing to undergo an abortion, they don't have the right to do so. And another thing is that an abortion is only allowed up to 24 weeks in India and not after that for anyone.
Thank you for that information, Sashank.
Yeah, just carrying on. Though the law is somewhat progressive now, when you compare it to the United States, there is still a lot of discrepancies, I would say. Like the one that criminalizes miscarriage. What do you mean by good faith? How do you define good faith over there? And in a law, you need to kind of define it properly. So that's kind of there. And it's not in India. The abortion is not out of complete free will as well. It's based on the social and the economic conditions. Now that itself is you can bring that into argument. What exactly do you mean by social and economic conditions? And so there are a lot of, I wouldn't say loopholes, but somewhat certain uncertainties and cloud over the meaning of those. And so that's also there. Those are some of the demerits, I would say. And coming back to your later part of the question that kind of asked the influence that the Roe v. Wade would have on India, it's somewhat very difficult to kind of say. But I don't think it would have a lot, because as we have been discussing, there's been this multipolarized world that's creating, and kind of Malik has been writing articles about it, and how it's been kind of how the soft power of the United States is kind of declining. Come on, we all watch now K-pop. Now that itself is a clear indication that the US soft power is declining. And so with the US soft power declining and the waning influence of the United States, when you add that to the quite bold remarks by Jai Shankar as well, you can see that India is kind of moving away from the United States and is from their influence and their big brother attitude, and kind of trying to build their path on their own. And moreover, all throughout the world, the abortion rights were actually kind of they kind of came into effect with people with protest, court proceedings, and with people kind of making a coalition with their own government, not with the support of the United States or its influence. Now that democracies, liberal democracies rather, they have kind of matured, somewhat matured, and their legal courts have their own records to fall against. It's somewhat, I wouldn't really say that the Roe v. Wade case would have an impact, particularly in the Indian context.
All right, thank you, Shreya.
It's not per se to the Indian argument, but this is a case that I came across. And like I would, I'm not so well versed with the legal side of things. I'm not a law student, liberal arts student. So this happened in Northern Ireland, where a woman who was brain dead was kept on life support against the wishes of her family for 4 weeks to keep the fetus viable. Could someone like help me understand how is that a possibility? Is that a possibility in the Indian context against the wishes of the family?
Malika?
No, it's not. Family is like given the most importance. If you look at the family law structure also in India, it's like who gets next rights upon you and everything. So it's always family. So without the consent of the family, a fetus, like even if it's a fetus, will not get higher rights than
So the
what the
family,
law.
the whoever the legal person of, would be for taking calls, right? So I feel like that's a merit because this happened in Northern Ireland in 2018. It's not some. So yeah.
Another thing I would also like to bring up is that in India in recent years has been trying to show that they have been moving away from America. They've been trying to put themselves as a new world power, right? So when they're doing that, they have been trying to show that it's not just America that can be powerful. We can be powerful too. And I think the Modi government has been doing that, been pushing that agenda since 2014 with the way that they have been sort of um, I want to say glamorizing, but just putting Indian culture and Indian history and everything on a pedestal. So in that case, I don't, when such a law comes out, I don't think they look at it as backward because the Modi government has been pushing for Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao and everything. These all things have been putting importance on women's education. So when a law like this comes out, they are immediately thinking that no, it is wrong. It's against women's rights. And everything. They might not say it out publicly, but like Parth said, Jay Shankar is saying it, the International Foreign Minister of India is saying it. It's a very, very crucial step for India showing that we have stepped away from American. This does not define us and this shall not affect us and our policy.
Absolutely. Ishani?
Yeah, just to add on to what Malika just said, and even Sishank mentioned it. I think we've already discussed this in our past roundtables that how India has chosen a path of strategic autonomy. And that was very evident when it came to the Russia Ukraine crisis. I mean, the whole of the West was against Russia, but India took a neutral stance. And that is where India shows that even though we may be close, we may have close ties with the US, and that is primarily to counter China's rise, we are not dictated by US. And the fact that US even understood India's stance is something that shows that US also needs India somewhere. And moving on, I also feel that how everyone almost has mentioned how a foreign minister pointed out the human rights issue in the US. I feel that actually is again a very major stand that India is taking, that it's recognizing the loopholes within the US. And had it been, say, a couple of decades back, that would not have been happening, where US was like the sole part of the world. No one really questioned it. Whatever wrong was happening within it, it was like a dream world, a dream country to be in. But now, not just India, but I mean, a lot of countries are recognizing the loopholes within the US, and not just the US, like in the West, in the Western world itself. And coming on to our topic about how whether this can impact India's laws, I don't really think it's going to be impacting it directly. But again, you don't know India. There might be some sections who would feel that no, we should like protect the child, the unborn child and stuff. But again, I don't think it's going to be directly affected by what's happening in the US.
Thank you, Rushil.
Yeah, I think Shani raised a brilliant point, and I kind of want to follow on that point as well. India has recently, under Mr. Jaishankar, I believe so, has become very sly in its diplomacy. And I think India also recognizes there are stakes up for grabs. You know, we all realize that we're in a transitional world order, and we have been very coy in the past, and we've been very friendly in the past, and we've been seen as a benign power who wouldn't act upon or who wouldn't be opportunistic. But I think under Jaishankar, we started to realize that we have our own weight, and we can pull our own weight, we have our own gravitas. And under a transitional world order, India realizes that stakes up for grabs, and India themselves can make a name and sort of stand out. We look at India's model of diplomacy in recent past. When there was the Sri Lankan crisis happening, India sent a huge aid package. India has regularly sent aid packages to East Africa and has given and has helped out nations during crisis. I think India is also seeing this, the recent, developments happening domestically in US politics. And it's saying that India itself can mark itself as a reliable partner, a partner who's a stable partner, not just in the field of technology or amidst the recent US-China tech war, but also morally speaking, because one thing that India can always bank on is its great culture and history and how morally astute we are, and we have always been. So India, I think, is sort of also adding that bit onto its soft power, onto our rather larger soft power when we talk about our diversity and our culture and whatnot. As for the point of view that is it going to affect India directly, I agree with Ashani. I don't think it's going to affect us directly, but I think culturally it would direct us. Simply because if we look at politically, like in Indian politics, we have always looked at other people or other countries and have sort of seen, okay, if they're doing something like this, then it's okay for us. Part of the reason why BJP has had this rampant rise of, such aggressive policies and this autocratic such a autocratic regime, it's because you also see that in the US itself. You also see this exaggeration and this aggravation of emotions and public sentiments under Trump. And sort of we see something like that, we see, oh, there are no checks and balances outside which are condemning us. So, okay, we can push forward now. So I think culturally, this can also offset us into a very, dangerous path. And I think that is something we need to be aware of domestically. Because we don't have an authority, BJP is on its own rise, but I think as a newer generation of people, we have to be cognizant of the risks that are, being put forward by not just our country, but countries around the world. And we have to make up our own mind and say, hey, this is where the buck stops. This is what we do. And this is how we're going to lead our own lives. So yeah, I think that is something we need to be conscious of, America's own cultural aspects and its efforts. And I don't think it will affect directly, but culturally it might.
Thank you for that, Shia.
Yeah, Another thing, I feel culturally, and I mean more religiously in this context, abortion is treated very differently in terms of India. Oh no, uh, just a second. Sorry, my house just suffered a power cut. I had to shift the networks. So yeah, I was just saying, culturally as well as in terms of how abortion is considered by Christianity, it's just crime, or it's just not allowed, it's just a sin, period. There is no exceptions to it. Whereas according to Indian where- while not trying to classify India as any one kind of traditions, but even if you look at the most harshest of them, which is Vedic traditions, and if you look at Upanishads, then I think it's the Garbha Upanishad, which talks about abortion may be allowed in case it is to save the life of mother. What I'm trying to get at here is uh, Indian, and by again, sorry for the use of Indian, but Hindu traditions would prioritize the life of the living human, which is the mother or whoever's carrying the child, to the life of the child, because that is not considered. I mean, while the fetus can be alive, it's not considered to be part of whatever society. I feel like I'm sorry for the digression, but what I'm trying to get at is there is a fundamental difference in how we approach life and how we consider the viability of the fetus. And I feel that also impacts how Indian morality considers Indian or Hindu morality considers abortion, because according to a survey carried out in the US around Roe v. Wade, Asian American, especially South Asian Indian families, were 68% for abortion rights, and the same was lesser in white Christian families. It was lesser in Muslim American families. So what I'm trying to say here is that, hi, am I audible? My net keeps glitching. But what I'm trying to get at here is there is a cultural difference. There has always been a cultural difference in our understanding of abortion as being uh, immoral. It's if it is to save a life or if it is to prioritize the life of mother, it's kind of been allowed. But yeah, consider prioritizing the mother's freedoms, maybe not. Maybe that's where Indians would disagree. Indian mother's freedoms is not what they want to protect.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So, with that, we bring an end to this very informative discussion. So far, we have gone into what Roe versus Wade is, how it came about, and the implications of the decision that has been taken the implication that will have not only within the US but also globally. We have understood how it's going to affect us, considering the soft power that America has, and how it's giving an excuse to all the other countries to actually implement their conservative ideas regarding a woman and the autonomy of her autonomy over herself, um, and actually give them a reason, an excuse, and a precedent to do the same within their countries. However, from our discussions, fortunately, probably fortunately, India is a country which will not be easily influenced into going in the same direction as the US and other countries like Korea or Ireland have. So with that, we end this discussion, and thank you for your inputs, and we hope to see you again.